in a simple way, I think I feel my most, like, I feel the most authentically me when I'm at home because it's just me and I'm not being perceived by anyone. And so I can be however I want to be. You know, the performance breaks down when you're at home. Yeah, I think that's probably, and like with my friends, you know, people who I know either identify with or kind of mirror or are adjacent to my own identity intersections because I have so many of them. When I'm around other people who experience that, I think I feel much, it's easier to express those things myself when I'm around other people that I know also exist in that world. But other than that, really it is like when I'm by myself is when I feel like the most authentically me. Yeah. Everything. Yeah, I wish I knew everything that I know now as a child. Nah. In terms of gender, I think I wish I knew or had it confirmed because I think I felt this my whole life, but just I wish I knew for sure that gender was a performance and like and that's it. Like there's it's actually not that deep, you know? I think people add so much unwarranted depth to the idea of like being of a gender or identifying with a gender when all of it is farcical. All of it is just, it's been prescribed and everyone just assumes they have to subscribe to it. And like, I wish I knew from a younger age that that's a crock of shit and you can actually do whatever you want and it doesn't have to match any kind of labeling system. And then, yeah, with sexuality, leading on with like that labeling system thing, I think that's also the same thing. And like, I wish I knew that as a kid because gender really means nothing. Therefore, like your sexuality labels also don't have as much depth as people want to think, you know? Because it goes to stuff like, I don't know, like I identify as non binary. And so, like, I'm not a woman, but there are a lot of like straight identifying cis men who would maybe find me attractive or like, you know, be interested, you know? Or like I've slept with cis straight identifying men and I'm like, it's actually not that deep for you to acknowledge that because you are attracted to someone who is of a different gender, you're actually just bisexual as a, like at the very least, you're a little bit bisexual because you are attracted to women and also now you've realized non-binary people. And it's not that deep. Like it's not that deep because like your sexuality doesn't have to define every single part of your life. Like you can still hang out with your dude bros and enjoy rugby and like want to get a beer and be bisexual. Like that's fine. And it is not that deep at all. And I wish not just me, but I wish everyone knew that at a younger age because I think it would just allow for people to just do whatever and then like the labels that we have would be a consequence of us living our true lives rather than us altering our lives to like adhere to the standards of a label, you know? So that, yeah, I think that's what I wish I knew as a kid.
Great.
Um, I think mostly just by like existing because I don't know, it's like again, it's like these labels that we have, these labeling systems that we have for gender and sexuality or whatever. I don't really care about them anymore. Like I care how I am perceived by other people, so that dictates a little bit of how I present myself. But like no matter what I do, I'm a non-binary person who is also like pansexual, so it's like any way I decide to express myself is expressing that. And then I guess I just base it off like what kinds of spaces I feel like I'm going to be in on a particular day. Like, and how much I want to perform, you know, like, if we all agree that gender is a performance kind of thing. So it's like, if I'm going to be in a space that I know is going to have a lot of queer people, I'll probably feel more comfortable like dressing slightly more androgynously or like being a bit more like butch or you know, that kind of stuff, or like using queer slang and all of that kind of thing. It's like code switching is also a part of the like queer experience as much as it is about the experience of like non-white people, you know. And like, yeah, I think it's really just like based on how I feel every day, with acknowledgement of the external spaces that I'm going to be interacting with. Like when I'm at home by myself all the time, I express my queerness by wearing track pants and hoodies and staying in my room and making beats. That's me being like a queer trans person, because I just exist as a queer trans person. So like, yeah, but if I'm like going out, then I'm like, oh, I'm going to this part of town. It's already a thing that I'm brown, so I'm gonna like normcore it a little bit, you know? Or like, you know, I'm going to, like today at volunteering at the tattoo convention, I'm like, there's going to be a lot of alternative people here, so I can dress a little bit more alternatively today, or like whatever. But I think it's like, and going back to like why I said I feel most authentically me when I'm by myself, it's like as soon as other people are involved, as soon as an outward perspective is involved, I'm trying to situate myself in like the safest position possible. So like I deeply believe that everything I do is of my identities, you know, like making my coffee in the morning is an expression of my queerness and my whatever. But like getting a coffee outside of the house, it's a completely different situation, but it's still just as queer or whatever as it is when I'm doing it at home, you know? But also it's like it's also a form of communication, you know? Like you're not going to have an opportunity to talk to every person you pass on the street, but you can tell them a lot by how you dress or the types of words that you do use. Like if someone were to overhear your conversation, or if you're like interacting with a retail employee or a hospital employee, like you can signal to them actually quite a lot about yourself by firstly how you dress, and then secondly even like how you order your thing or how you ask for assistance in a store. Like there's so many points in our existence where we're communicating a lot more, I think, than we as humans are given credit for, because so much communication is nonverbal, you know, so much of it is, yeah, it's to do with so many different aspects, and it's all dependent on it being perceived, you know? And like there's this innate thing we have where we've needed community to survive, and therefore we've needed means to communicate within community to survive. And that has to be a combination of things, and it doesn't just stop at language, you know? Which I think queer people like understand like really intrinsically, is that it's so much to do with how we interact with the world is actually not based at all on the way that we speak or the things that we say, but it's how we look when we enter a room. And so I think a lot of thought goes into that for all of us. I think it's also probably why people think like queer people are especially vain, especially like younger ones, because we do think so much about how we're perceived and how we look in spaces. And yeah. As a farce, which I said before, it's just fake. Like all of it is fake. And it's been like, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to kind of say that without like, I don't want to diminish the connection that a lot of people, especially trans people, have with their chosen identities. You know, I'm like, absolutely identify however you want, but just like, yeah, again, it's like, it's a performance, you know, like whether or not you dress femininely actually has no say on whether or not you're a woman if you identify as a woman. Whether or not you present in a masculine way has no say on whether or not you're a man, or the validity of you identifying as a man if you choose to do so. Just like with being non-binary, like you don't owe anyone androgyny in order for your identity as a non-binary person to be valid and to be respected, you know? And like, I don't know, there are like the classic things you can roll off. I think of gender as a social construct, and therefore like the construction of any given gender must be different, but depending on cultural context. So like I might identify as non-binary in this like Western New Zealand context, but as like a Maori person in Aotearoa, I mean, it's technically, I guess, like a non-binary identity, but I identify as being like irakore, which is the kupu Maori for like gender void, vaguely. And that is based on what I've learned about gender roles within Te Ao Māori, which is a different construction to gender roles within the Western New Zealand, which are then going to be different to the construction of gender in like, you know, just like Zimbabwe or like Japan or like, I don't know, Palestine. You know, the constructions of gender that exist there are all going to be different. So I think even for like cisgendered people, it's like pretty bold of them to assume that they would still vibe with their like assigned gender if they were all of a sudden in a different context, because I'm like, their social construction of your gender is completely different. So you might find that you feel more trans in a certain context than, you know. And again, that's why I'm just like, it's not that deep. Like, it's not that deep, and it's so fluid and so changeable. Like, you could identify as any kind of thing in any kind of context, and like, no one has to understand it, they just have to respect it. And I think like, yeah, people really just need to like lighten up about gender. It's like it's not actually as big of a deal as everyone thinks it is.
Amazing. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that people could try to do. It's very like TikTok of me, but like normalize it, you know? I think representation gets overlooked a lot. Same with like optics, all of that kind of stuff. But exposing children to what it's like to exist in like whatever body or like identifying in whatever way is only going to be helpful for them, because they have a larger sample source of information, so they can make a more considered decision. Like, it's just good practice when you're learning anything, especially about a topic that's this like broad and like full of so many differing opinions. The best thing you can do for anyone learning in that space is give them as much of the information as possible, so that they can, and also the tools to decode it, so that they can go through and be like, I vibe with this, I do not vibe with this, and then like they can make their own thing. But I really feel like that's already happening, just purely because of the internet. Like, there's no real stopping anyone from finding out whatever they want at any point in time. Like, so I think really it's just like guiding people to make sure that they end up in the right spaces, so that they don't end up in, because, you know, as much as there's potential for good with the internet, there's also potential for bad. There's a lot of really dark shit on the internet. So it's just like giving children the tools to navigate that space as safely as possible with some critical thinking skills. I really think just like making sure kids learn critical thinking skills and then just exposing them to as much as possible is like the only way to do it. It's already happening though. Like, I saw a 16-year-old on TikTok the other day. I was just scrolling through and I wanted to save the video so bad, but my phone's been like carking it recently. So it just like wouldn't, it froze on it. But it was this 16-year-old kid from the States, and they just really, really succinctly went through the step-by-step of how they came to and like, they haven't had sex. They haven't done any of like the stuff that you'd think you need to like know any of this stuff. But they just went really clearly through like the step-by-step of how they realized that they are in fact like pansexual and gender fluid. And I'm like, you're 16 years old. Like, I cannot imagine having that level of clarity as like a 16-year-old. Like, I wish. And I know that that was only possible for them because of the internet and because of having access to heaps of different expressions, because they were very logically like, I've seen this, I've seen this, I've seen this, I felt this thing, and this thing, and therefore the label that makes the most sense for me at this time is being a pansexual, gender fluid person. And I was just, my mind was blown. I was like, I'm 27 years old and I've only just stopped crying about this, like maybe a couple years ago, you know? And so it gives me like a lot of hope, but I really think that most of the stuff that's happening is already naturally happening, you know? Yeah.